I appreciated your contribution this morning, song-wise and testimony-wise, and it's always tough to shut things down. I never know quite how to do that, and I've said that before, but sorry, Bob, for shutting you down too soon. I'm glad you just raised your hand and said it. What you had to share, that was good, and I hope life can be that way, where we can always be attentive and sensitive to what God is doing. Sometimes it's easy to have a program and march straight ahead, but I think God works through different things, through different people, and through different times in life, different ages. So I'm blessed to be here this morning. I'm blessed that Jesus is the light of the world. I heard a statement this morning. It's easy to get excited about what God does and forget who He is. Some lady named Stephanie said that, and I don't know if it has to do with the sermon or not, but it's easy to get excited about what God does and forget who He is. So I'm going to read a passage of Scripture. It's familiar. It's one we've known probably all our life. 1 Samuel 17, story of David and Goliath, story that's probably been in our minds and hearts since little children. I think between David and Goliath and Noah and the ark and Daniel and the lion's den, those three probably have been taught, and to me at least, as a young child growing up and things. But I've been encouraged recently with this passage. 1 Samuel 17, I think I'm going to read the whole passage, and this is the ESV this morning, the Electronic Standard Version. No, the English Standard Version. 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way, So shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, the eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield-bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in heaven, in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, Inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Just like to talk a little bit about giants this morning. Not San Francisco, not New York giants. Shed giants. Peoria giants. Harrisburg giants. Crawfordsville giants. We all face giants in life, and David faced a giant here. David was the youngest in the family. David was probably not a real big guy, it doesn't sound like, and he faced a giant. And just want to talk about giants. Number one, they are real. Number two, everyone faces giants. Number three, there's more to see than just giants. I don't know if you think of things in life as giants, but we all deal with things that could be called a giant, could be called something in life that is bigger than we are and more difficult to face than we know how to do. Goliath was real. Number one, giants are real in our lives. Goliath was a real threat. He was over 9 foot tall, and I think he had 125 pounds of armor. I think a lot of us weigh less than that. And he was an invincible guy, and for 40 days he comes out and makes fun of Israel. You know, send me somebody to fight me. And giants are not just some figment of our imagination. Giants are not something that we dream up. Giants are problems, pressures, pains, and persecutions we will face from time to time in our lives. Giants oftentimes cause major difficulties in our life and brings with it the possibility of life-threatening situations. Those things were written by a pastor named Samuel Burgess. I was working on this, thinking about this outline and thinking about what to share, and read that was the beginning of a sermon that this man had prepared. But giants we face them, and I'm sure you've all faced something in your life that's too big for you to handle. You don't know how to deal with it. I remember back in school, I wasn't even in high school, this was 6th grade. We played football, and I loved football, but I had to line up against Alan Yoder. I don't think Alan's here today, no. But Alan was big. Alan hit puberty way before the rest of us even knew what puberty was. I don't think he knew what it was, but he had a fuzzy lip, and he was tall and big dude, and I had to line up against him in football. And every time I lined up against him, I think I was on offense, he was on defense, and he just knocked me backward. I mean, I couldn't do anything. There was probably a 40 or 50 pound weight advantage, and so I came up with this idea. I only remember doing it one time. I don't know if the game ended or if, I don't know, but I just remember, I thought, I'm gonna lay down, I'm gonna kneel down when he comes at me this time and take his legs out, and I did, and he went flying. I looked back, and I remember this pile of legs and arms, and Al, I dealt with my giant that way, I guess. I don't know, but anyway, things that we deal with in life that are too big. I was trying to look up what happens, or what sort of a thing would happen to a person if they hear the same thing for 40 days in a row, like this Goliath came out morning and evening and made fun of the Israelites. And I couldn't find any good illustrations of anything that supported my cause, and I didn't even know what my cause really was, but I thought there's got to be something about habits or how you form a habit, and I read a little something about habits, and it can be anywhere from 10 days to 500 days to form a good habit, so I thought, well, that's not really relevant. But when you hear things over and over again, it can you almost start to believe them sometimes. And my wife mentioned a poem, and so I looked up this poem by a lady named Dorothy Law Nolt. It said, if a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be a patient child. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns confidence. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. If a child lives with approval, he learns to like himself. If a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to find love in the world. These Israelites, they didn't have anything good for those 40 days. Now, they were warriors. They were, trained in battle. But when you got a guy that's that big, how do you deal with that? I can't imagine hearing that same thing being made fun of. And for those 40 days, he came out morning and evening and made fun of them. Everyone faces giants. Point number 2, everyone faces giants. All the Israelites saw and heard Goliath and his threats. Verse 11 says, when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. I don't know if those words are in this translation exactly. I sort of hopped around with... Yeah, the ESV says they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I think this might have been the New Living Translation. Said the Israelites were terrified and deeply shaken. I don't know if you've ever been terrified. Have you ever been terrified? That's a pretty strong word. I think I was terrified one time for like 2 seconds that I remember. I know I've been terrified before, but we bought this mask on our bus. It was a leftover something. I don't know. It looked terrible. It looked like an old man with warts and just a kind of a... Should have never bought it, but anyway, somebody bought it. And so I was driving one night. It was dark, and the front of our bus is kind of dark anyway. There was a wall, and you kind of sit back in your own little cubicle there, kind of isolated from the rest of the world. And we were driving along. All of a sudden, this mask comes up and looks right at me. I think it was Debbie that did it, and I was so scared for a little bit till I finally, you realize who it is, and then it's not so bad. But when you see that kind of a face coming at you, and you're not expecting it, and it's dark, and you're tired, and everything had to be just right, and everything was just right, and everything was just wrong then too for a little bit. But that was like a momentary fright. Maybe terrified isn't the right word, but these guys were afraid, and sometimes Satan wants us to believe that our problems and struggles are unique to just us. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. So when you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. And then also Galatians 6:2, I think we have a privilege to help each other. It says, bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What are some giants that we face today? How can we could put some names with giants, I think. Loneliness, we talked about loneliness a little bit. Fear, discouragement, abandonment, financial hardship, depression, doubt, insecurity, unemployment, and there's many, many more we could list. But, these things are things that we deal with, and we don't always know how to deal with them. Steve, you're kind of facing some health things, and that could be a giant in your life. Not a lot of answers, not a lot of what do we do? And thank you, David, by the way. We could mention other names too, people that have been facing things, dealing with things, and there's not really any good answers. Point number 3, there's more to see than just giants. I guess this point I came up with because it's correct, but I don't know that I always believe it. And there's more than just giants. You know, David had a different perspective in this whole scenario. David saw the Lord. David saw the God of the armies of Israel. And he mentioned the name of the Lord. He mentions the Lord, or the name of the Lord, 9 different times in this passage, because that's what his concept was. That's what the lens through which he saw Goliath. He didn't see this big guy that he couldn't face. He saw him through the lens of God, that God had given him strength before and he would deliver him again. Maybe he was naive. I don't know. I don't know how to totally look at that. You know, we could call it different things, but David had faith in the Lord. He had faith in God's strength to deliver him. David saw Goliath through the lens of God's power. He had encountered bears, lions, etc., and was able, with God's strength, to fight them off. He remembered what God had done for him. And that's I think, what the key is to dealing with the giants in our lives. Remember that God has been with us in the past. I know God's been with me in the past. I know God has been with you all in the past, and there's been things that we've gone through and dealt with, and God knows what we're facing. I know that sounds kind of churchy. I always struggle with sounding like I'm talking out of a Sunday school book, because it's not what I mean to do, but God knows what we're facing. I was thinking about that this morning, you know, preparing for this sermon. I've been all over the map this week. The Lord is too, though. The Lord goes everywhere too, and He can minister to folks wherever they are. And so I thought, you know, my scatterbrainness and not being able to pull things together sometimes, God knows about that too. And He's able and willing to help us. He's able and willing to help. We just need to call on Him. And I've told people, maybe I've mentioned it here, but I go out the back sometimes to walk and to pray, and sometimes my prayers aren't very pretty. I hope nobody hears them except the Lord, because they're not always very, very nice and very neat, and they wouldn't fit in a Sunday school book very well. But God hears those prayers too, desperate prayers and prayers of desperation. God's a God of abundance. I thought about things that God has done for us in the past, like in a financial sense. We were visiting a family or a friend one time in another state, and we borrowed their vehicle and drove a little bit, and I just felt like we should leave a little money with them to pay for gas. I think they were in school at the time, the one was, and I felt like we should give them an amount of money, and so we did. We left a little bit of money in a card and went on our way, and I don't know, some months later, somebody gave us a card, and in that card was twice the amount of money that we had left for that friend. And that reminded us, we've talked about that before, God can give back. God can meet needs beyond what we can even, realize. And I think at the time we were just newly married and needed some dog food for our dog. And we helped, oh boy, they lived over here on Lynn West Road. Was it Ralph and Mildred, maybe? The older couple. And I helped them. Ralph and Lucille Holderman, there we go. Ralph and Lucille Holderman. You all remember them? Some of you do. Yeah, we helped them move, and I took my pickup over and let them use it and things, and at the very end, they had kind of everything wrapped up and ready to leave, and they said, we got this bag of dog food here that we can't really use, and would you like it? And I remember we were praying that we could find some dog food, or, I don't know, be a way to pay for it or something. I don't remember exactly, but they said we could have that dog food, and it was actually the Old Roy. It was the brand of dog food that we fed our dog at the time. So God met that need specifically right then, and that was back in 1999, I think it was. And I've told this story too. It's been a while, but I know my ticket story. I know Kevin and Jean heard this for a lot of times when we were doing prison ministry together, but I bought 2 tickets to go to the Cathedral Quartet concert in Portland. This was also 1999. And Melvin and Dolores Boss were taking us up there to Portland, and we got ready quick and went out the door and took off, and en route we discovered that we left our tickets at home. And so then we didn't know what to do. We were most of the way there, and Melvin's had their tickets, and so we didn't want to make them turn around. Obviously, if we would have turned around, we would have never made it in time, and so we started praying, frantically, I suppose. And anyway, so we get to the church and thought, well, we'll just walk toward the door. I mean, there's nothing else to really do. We didn't have tickets, and we just, marched up there. And there was a lot of people and kind of funneling into these doors, and we just kept right on walking. And somebody handed us 3 tickets over a shoulder. I never did see who it was or anything, but there was 3 tickets in that in their hand, and we were 2 people. We needed 2 tickets, and God provided 3 tickets. So I still have the tickets that we never got to use, but it's a good reminder of how God meets needs. And so that was a long time ago, and I guess I need to start carrying these things again. Anyway, that's what I have to say about giants this morning. They are real in our lives. They are things that we deal with. Everybody faces them. Everybody has them to deal with. But there is more to see than just the giants in our life. There's more to see than just the big things in our life. There's God. God is with us, and God's beside us. And David ran toward Goliath. It said at the end there, verse 48, and do we run toward our problems or away from them? I had to ask myself that question. Sometimes it's easy to run away from problems, but let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, thank you for your stories, Lord, your living word, the stories that we can learn, we can grow, we can be changed, Lord. I pray that we'd be changed today, and those things that we seem to see as huge, that are immovable, Lord, we just pray for faith to move them, faith to believe that you can move them, Lord, and thank you for these folks, Lord. I pray a blessing on each one today. I pray a blessing especially on the ones that are dealing with heavy things, Lord, that you'd be with them today. Pray this in Jesus' name, amen.